Okay, now we're on to the 19th century. Now we're moving back to the tongue and back to anatomical features. Now, not only the tongue, but applications, the therapies that were applied at this time, were done to support what was called a weak tongue. And as we're going to get into here, it's not only the tongue, but it's other anatomical features too. We're not to the point of understanding physiology or the physiological system, but the idea is that the tongue is where the stuttering is happening. So it was treated by placing a gold or ivory fork underneath it to support the weight of the tongue. Interestingly enough, the whole Madame Lee and Yates story that I talked about in class, how Madame Lee was a French philosopher who developed a treatment for stuttering, which was the alveolar ridge. So holding the tongue on the alveolar ridge. Yates, who was an American, stole this secret and sold it, coincidentally enough, to the United States government at the time. So when we're talking about all these, remember that there are underlying mechanisms at play, and that holding the tongue there likely altered the motor preparation and sensory feedback systems in general. The outward stuttering, these symptoms may not be the actual problems themselves, and how we apply treatment to a symptom may not be affecting the underlying mechanism as we think it does or should. So that's one of the reasons why we need to have a philosophical orientation, a theoretical framework of knowing why we're doing things and what outcomes we're hoping to see, if that. In addition to thinking that it was the tongue, now we're philosophizing that it was in the larynx also, and that to treat problems in the larynx at the time, we implemented, I keep saying we, but they implemented altered breathing patterns. And some of those altered breathing patterns are still very omnipresent today. Diaphragmatic breathing, continuous airflow, airflow therapies in general, and this idea of the schwa, producing a before a sentence. I'm going to say something like this. Now, people who stutter, if you measure their speech, especially after treatment, if you measure their airflow, rather, it is aberrant. However, if you measure normally fluent speakers speaking with the same strategies, they have the same differences in their respiratory systems. No longer the external intercostals are helping them breathe, or to the same extent, it's mainly breathing from the diaphragm. So as we've talked about, the articulators become sequenced and disorganized, so does the respiration. It's not to say that that's a causal factor of stuttering, because, once again, causation or correlation does not equal causation. So just because we notice something happening, either the kinematics of speech, the respiration of speech might be different. It might not be because by stuttering. It might be a consequent of stuttering or a consequent of the treatment, as is often the case. The idea that I covered in class about the schwa, we don't really want to treat people by having them develop secondaries. So engage therapy of the arm swinging, moving from larger circles to smaller, and then eventually wanting a finger just making small circles in the pocket, or the chewing therapy like this. Stuff like that is just very unnatural. And in telling people it's okay to say it's okay to say although, like whatever interjection they have, that can quickly become a crutch and become very overused, and that is a learned behavior which then we're going to have to decrease by bringing one's attention to it through audio video recording, through having them watch those things, having them talk in front of a mirror, and become more aware of what's happening there. We don't want to replace those negative behaviors with another negative behavior. We want awareness and a true form of speech, or a more true form of speech. So I talked about these stuttering, these surgeries, pretty extensive in the last discussion. There's some pretty sadistic things that happened to people who stutter. Slicing out a triangular wedge of their tongue with a 50% mortality rate, and the last one happening in the 1950s. Electroshock therapy, trephination. Stuttering is impactful. And if, as I've said many times, if we only focus on how someone sounds, there is still self-resentment, self-guilt, shame, fear, etc., etc. We need to focus on the individual and having the person who stutters come first as opposed to the stuttering. So have it be a person-centered approach. Okay. So a point I've been trying to make throughout this lecture and in the in-class lectures also is that with changes in the society and with changes in technology influencing the society, or changes in the psychological fields, our field tends to adapt to the culture. So as technology advanced, as the assembly line was around, the Ford, Model T, etc., etc., people are becoming more interested in mechanics and prosthetic devices. So, as it is with stuttering, they started to make a lot of technology for people who stutter. Anything from a silver obturator to choke collars, and a lot of other things. There were hundreds and hundreds of patents at the time. Sadly enough, or maybe not sadly, but as I've been saying also, things come back around again. So there's a professor at Ole Miss who specializes in stuttering and fluency disorders as well, and he in 2012 or 13 filed for a patent for a device that goes around the neck and vibrates when someone speaks. So for people who stutter, it's the same idea as the choke collar. Not screws and not as rudimentary technology, but still the same physical effect. And hopefully you're understanding from this in the in-class lecture that what we have to go on is our experience through observing the physical world. In stuttering, hopefully now you're understanding what some of these physical realities are. So when stuttering happens, why it happens, or the location that it happens in most often, how type of stuttering can be changed from the sounds that are produced, etc., etc. Those have been unchanged for thousands of years, so a lot of the theories and philosophies have targeted and focused on that physical phenomena of stuttering, which that is going to lead to your clinical judgment and clinical intuition. So we want to hone your skills at understanding what's going on and then provide you with the framework of how to base your treatment to most effectively help your clients. A little bit after this time, now we're moving into stuttering as a learned behavior. The thing that's nice about stuttering is it's been around for thousands of years, so a lot of famous people have talked about it. It stands out. I'm not sure if I gave the example yet of when I was in grad school. I went to a restaurant that you had to tell them your name, kind of like Starbucks, and then they would call your name after the fact. I stuttered so severely saying my name that a year later at a different restaurant, the same server who took my name remembered my name. So stuttering stands out to people, and it's very impactful for the person who stutters as well. So there's a lot of people who have commented, and philosophers, doctors, historians, etc., about what the experience of stuttering is. An example is Alexander Bell. So, grandfather of Alexander Graham Bell, believed that stuttering was a learned behavior and treated it by over-articulating and over-practice. I talked about this a little bit more in class, so I'm not going to go into a lot of the examples I used, but this is where we're at the 1840s and around that time. And there was an idea that confidence became a concern also. So it's not only the learning aspect of stuttering and the overt aspect, but there's a confidence, there's an anxiety aspect as well. And this is about the first time that the approach avoidance idea comes up. So, as it is with learning theories, or theories based in learning for stuttering, they tend to see a more dynamic model, or dynamic theory. So, multiple influences, including cognitive, affective, social components. So, not always, but more often than not in learning theories influencing stuttering, they are more dynamic and more multimodal. So, psychoanalysis. Now, as World War I is ending, people are coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, other types of brain injuries, shock traumas, blast injuries that hadn't been seen before. It was causing neurogenic stuttering and other events to happen. So we did a lot of talk therapy. Specifically, Freud was huge at this point. And even though Freud didn't believe stuttering was an anal fixation that could be cured by psychoanalytical therapy, his students, Croat and Brill, did. So they tried to treat hundreds of people by talk therapy, getting down to what was happening in their childhood to form this self-gratification, this childhood R word that I'm not thinking of right now, to come about. So these repressed needs, and the repressed needs hypothesis are what these hypotheses are termed. So through talk therapy and all the research currently looking at research from that time, only one person out of 190 or so cases, I think it was, said that they were cured from this type of approach. And it's likely that there were other influences with that one person. So, because of the lack of success, they actually did try to change their ways a little bit. Not completely. But they did use desensitization, so working up that hierarchy of feared and difficult situations, decreasing these social stressors, and self-gratification by pseudo-stuttering. So in context of what is current today, And in the context of pseudo-stuttering and the discussions that we had there, think about why you're doing pseudo-stuttering as a clinician. Are you doing it for your benefit? Or are you doing it for your client's benefit? If you are doing it for your client's benefit, what aspect are you doing? Because it has multiple benefits, but understanding why you're doing that and clearly explaining that is going to help the process. In their terms, Croat and Brill's, pseudo-stuttering was self-gratification. So it was giving the person who stutters what they wanted to have happen, which is stuttering. And their idea was because it increases attention, it increases an oral fixation through, etc., etc. So they did have benefit from it. They didn't know exactly why they were doing it, but it was giving the person who stutters what the therapist, thought they wanted, which is stuttering. Which still kind of holds true today. Stuttering, voluntarily and in a controlled manner, is going to increase fluency. All of our techniques that we're going to be going over here in a few weeks are types of stuttering that are just produced in a more controlled manner. So, in essence, some of the theories out there, the gestural model of stuttering inhibition, for example, says that the brain actually wants to stutter, and says that stuttering is what's trying to send the disrupted signal with more information. So the brain actually requires stuttering to send a more complete signal. In this therapy from Croat and Brill, they thought that stuttering was a way to address a repressed need. Maybe not the case, but it's still this idea of where's the commonality and how are they explaining this physical phenomenon that changes when people who stutter produce stuttering in a controlled fashion. Something very interesting is we've talked just a very little bit about group therapy and institutions for individuals who stutter. Not till the 1920s did this become common practice. Did it become common practice for people who stutter to attend residential clinics, and after they've graduated from those programs, become the clinicians or teachers at those programs. And it leads to the foundation, group therapy, of self-help programs, of talk therapy through not talk with a therapist, but talk with associated members of a group. Interestingly enough, and kind of sadly enough also, if you take a look at this blurb from the Bogue Institute, there are still many claims out there for liquids or medicines or the POWERS program, which is more common on the west coast of the United States, but is still used around the world too. That focuses more on airflow therapy, and the person, Ark Powers, who does it, is actually an exercise scientist and an exercise coach, not a speech-language pathologist. So this idea of marketing saying I can cure you is still a rampant thing. So as parents, as clients, as people search the internet, they're still coming across cures for stuttering, which we need to be aware of, because that sets up a false expectation and a false sense of hope. for what is not likely to become a disorder that can be cured. So, being aware that there are still people who say that they can cure your stuttering or cure your client's stuttering, you need to be aware of that as clinicians to combat that misinformation.